Hello everyone. In this session, we'll try to understand what is the differences between the Docker Swarm and K8s and how to choose a container orchestration tool, whether to choose the Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, that is K8s. In the previous session, we have seen how the Docker image can be created and how we can run the container by using a Docker image, and now we will see which tool is better to use the orchestration tool, whether it's a Docker Swarm or Kubernetes. Now coming to what is this orchestration tool. So when you say the orchestration tool, when if you consider any project, there will be a n number of containers will be there. So any kind of project you take, there will be multiple containers will be running for the application. And also in a production, there will be multiple Docker daemons also will be there. That means multiple Docker servers also will be there. So that we have seen in detail in the previous session in the Docker Swarm. What is Docker Swarm and all. Now in this session we will see differences between the Kubernetes and Docker Swarm as well. So now coming to why we are calling K8s for Kubernetes. So K8s meaning is K8s also, it is nothing but the Kubernetes. Why we are calling K8s means there are 8 characters between K and S. The K and S, there are 8 characters. That is the reason we call it as a K8s for Kubernetes. And why this we are calling as an orchestration tool means when the number of containers will be keep on increasing due to demand of usage of the users in any application, the maintenance of the containers it will be very difficult. The maintenance in the sense, there may be, if there is a downtime, you need to restart the container, and if there are one container is got lost and immediately other containers one more new container should be running. The container in the sense, the application has to be restarted again. So managing these containers is an hectic task. So for that we have a orchestration tools, the one of the latest, and it is more powerful tool to orchestrate your containers. That means the application which are running inside a container, that tool is Kubernetes. It's a very powerful tool. And Kubernetes, it is already we have seen like the Kubernetes is developed by the Google. And what is the alternate for Kubernetes? We have the Docker Swarm. Now what is Docker Swarm? The Docker Swarm, already we have seen, it's an inbuilt feature of Docker. So whenever you are installing the Docker daemon in your system, by default the Docker Swarm also will be there inside a Docker daemon. So you no need to install other separate tools for the Docker Swarm. So what is a container? When you are telling orchestration tool, orchestration is nothing but the managing the container. What is the container? It's a server where the application is running, which we have seen. How you will create a container? You create a container by creation of, by you can create on Docker file, and you can run the Docker file and container will be created, and that is nothing but the application will be running. What is orchestration? Again, it's an arranging and managing. Example, it's a scaling up. We will see one practical example how we can the scale up our application, scale down automatically, how we can create a containers by using a orchestration tool like Docker Swarm. What tool we use to manage or orchestrate the container? You use the Docker Swarm or Kubernetes. It's a very big question whether you choose the Docker Swarm or K8s, that is Kubernetes. It's a big question. We will get some details about the differences between the Docker Swarm and the Kubernetes. To select the Docker Swarm, what is the difference between both? So we will see the few differences between the Docker Swarm and K8s. As we already know, the Docker Swarm, it is easy to use as it's a built-in feature of the Docker. We no need to install additional software to manage the containers. To manage the application which are running inside a container, you no need to install the additional tools and features. And other one, if you consider the Kubernetes K8s, that is Kubernetes, compared to Docker Swarm, you difficult to understand additional tools are required to manage the containers. For Docker Swarm, no additional features are required, additional tools are not required, but K8s, its additional tools are required to manage the containers. Docker Swarm is less time to understand, but Kubernetes you require more time to understand as it has many features compared to Docker Swarm. When the Docker Swarm is suitable, it's Docker Swarm is suitable for very small projects, and Kubernetes, if projects has many containers and if the project is complex, and better to use a Kubernetes. That means if you are working in a very big project and if you expect the more workload on your project and there are huge number of containers, then it is better to go with the Kubernetes. For Docker Swarm, no additional daemons as it works with the Docker daemon only, we have seen, and K8s should be running. But if you consider the Kubernetes also should be running. If you are working with the Docker images and all, and parallelly if you are working on the Kubernetes, then what you need, the Docker daemon also should be running and Kubernetes also should be running. Both should be running because you are working on the both. But if you are considered only Docker Swarm, then additional tools are not required. So who has developed this Docker Swarm? As it's part of the Docker engine only and Docker daemon itself, we can consider it's a developed by Docker Inc. But Kubernetes is developed by Google. Considering the Docker Swarm, less learning materials are available compared to Kubernetes because usually Docker Swarm is used for the very small projects and very small team and who is new for this Docker and all. So those people can use the Docker Swarm. And Kubernetes, it has a large open source community. It's an open source and it has very big community we have as it is developed by Google. I am repeating the Kubernetes. If your project is very big and more containers and more workload you expect, then it is better to go with the Kubernetes. More on Kubernetes and the Swarm. So Kubernetes has a complex installation process and steep learning curve. Kubernetes requires you to install separate command line interface tools and learn each of them. The transition from the Docker Swarm to Kubernetes can be complicated and difficult to manage. That means whenever you are, if you implemented your containers and you are managing your containers using the Docker Swarm, and if you are suddenly moving to the Docker container, if you are suddenly moving to the Docker Kubernetes, from Docker Swarm to Kubernetes after the implementation, everything is done in a Docker Swarm, and if you are moving to the Kubernetes, then it will be more complicated and difficult to manage again because you need to write all the code again from the Docker Swarm and you need to spin up in the Kubernetes. So which one is better? If you ask the question which one is the better, which one to use, it depends. The answer is it depends upon the usage and project. If the team size is small and project also small, and if the team is having less knowledge on orchestration of containers, then it is better to go with the Docker Swarm. But again, if the team is big and you are having more containers and more workload, then it is better to choose Kubernetes. If project is big and more workload, then choose Kubernetes. So we are keep on telling like it's managing the containers and increasing the count and that replica set, and if the one container is down, it should be automatically restart the container. Say for example, in older days when the application is down, then there will be very difficult to make again. The system admin should have been there and he has to check what is the issue and he has to update the code and restart it, maybe network issue and whatever the port issue and whatever it is. But now if you consider this Docker Swarm and Docker Kubernetes, when the container or your application is down, it is automatically it will restart your containers and it will be keep on running. We can see that in a practical. So I have the code here. I have just written the code. So this is the code, the Docker service create. What is this Docker service create? That means if you consider only for Docker, we use how we will create the application. You will make it running, then you will just create a container, right? So here instead of container, you need to create as a service. So service is again it's a one more layer for the container, we can say. So Docker service create, I am creating the container, and what is the name I am giving? Docker web. And how many replicas you need? You need 4 replicas are required. That means I want to run 4 number of count. The 4 containers should be running, and it's a publish. The port I am using 80 port, and on which image you are running this container. That means as I already I told, in case of Docker we run it as a container, right? But in case of Docker Swarm and Kubernetes, we run it as a service. On what top of which image you are running? We are running on top of Nginx. So Nginx image I am using here. I'll just go and execute this code blindly. So when I'm trying to run this code, I'm getting one error. So that means this node is not a Swarm manager, because it's just a Docker installed and just Docker is running. You can see here the Docker is running, and I made as I already informed, like how to stop the Kubernetes in the Docker desktop. You can go to the settings, and here the Kubernetes is disabled. I'm not using the Kubernetes. Now I'm giving you an example of only Docker Swarm, how we can spin up the containers by using a Docker image, that is nginx. So Kubernetes is disabled again. So what all the containers are running inside this Docker desktop? There are no containers are running. Okay. So now when I am running this code, I am telling this your our Docker daemon is unable to understand this Docker service command, because Docker service, it is not part of Docker daemon and Docker engine. So if you are considering it as a Docker service, there should be Docker Swarm should be running, or your node should be as part of the Docker Swarm, or the Kubernetes, your whatever the code you are running, it should be as part of the Kubernetes. Either one should be there. So we have already seen how to initialize your Docker daemon as a Docker Swarm. Docker Swarm init command I will give. So now if you see your current node, this is my node. This means my Docker engine, where Docker desktop and where my Docker engine is running. That application is one node. So you can check that Docker node ls. This will give you the node details. That means that machine details, and the star indicates it's a manager node. So this is only one node I have. That's what my system, where my Docker engine got installed and Docker daemon is running. Okay. So now when I keep that command again, so Docker service create. Now I will try to create Docker service. So the name I am giving a Docker web, and replicas I am giving 4 replicas, and the port number I am giving 80 for this image, that is nginx image. So now if you see the status, so this is a service ID, Docker service ID, and waiting 2-3 seconds to verify the task. Okay, so service, so this is the service ID. The service is running. So the service, so here how many replica sets we have given? We have given 4 replica sets. 1 2 3 4 replica sets are running, because if you mention, it's very simple command, right? Whenever you are using the Docker Swarm, it is very easy to manage your containers. That means you are trying to create 4 containers. If you give 1000, it will just create 1000 containers. Let us see in a Docker desktop whether the 4 services got created or not. If you go and check in the container, you see in a fraction of seconds the 4 containers are running. Okay, so we have in the previous slides we have seen whenever the Docker services are down or Docker containers are running or stopped, Docker Swarm should be able to restart automatically those containers without the human intervention, right? So let me try to delete these containers. So I am deleting these services again. So unfortunately the containers are deleted. Now I am not doing anything. See, in a fraction of seconds again the containers are recreated. So this will be taken care from the Docker Swarm. So Docker Swarm, it will be keep on looking into our container count. That means that replica set, how much we are given 4. So what is the actual count when I delete this? When I delete all the containers, what is the actual count? Actual count will be 0 when I delete. And what is the expected one? 4. I have given 4. So both are not matching. So what our Docker Swarm will do, automatically it will recreate all 4 containers, because actual and expected container count are missing. It is mismatched. So that is the reason it is creating those containers, right? So this is the very good example how to run the Docker service using any of the image. I will use the nginx image in single line, like how many replicas we can create. It's a replica set, and Docker web, it's an the container name which we are using. So this shows in a good example where how we can run the service using a Docker Swarm practically. If you have any questions or comments on this video, feel free to add your comments in the comment section. Thank you all.